Okay, can everyone hear me? So the first man versus machine challenge of the day, I have lost. The microphone has won. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the CaseCrunch Lawyer Challenge results announcement. My name's Rebecca Aiolo, and I'm the marketing director here. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone for spending your Friday evening with us for this results announcement. We really appreciate it. We know some of you have traveled from Germany. I myself have traveled from New York. Not that that is a competition, but I clearly win. So just to give you a brief overview of the presentation today, we're going to start by talking a bit about CaseCrunch as a company, who we are, what we do, what our vision is for the future. Then we're going to tell you about the reason you're here today, the Lawyer Challenge, why we came up with it, why we did it, and exactly how we did it. After that, our legal judge, Felix, will be giving you a brief overview about his involvement in the challenge and making a little commentary about AI and law. Finally, Ludwig will be speaking about the tech that went into the challenge. And then, the moment you've all been waiting for, the results announcement, which I'm sure will be the scariest thing to happen this Halloween weekend. And then we're going to be finishing with a quick Q&A where you can ask us any question you want. So I'm going to give over the floor to Joseph, our operations director, and thank you again for coming. And please bear with me while I change the microphone.
All of us are here because they want to know the results, right? However, what I think is a lot more important question is why those results are important. Now, we've been getting those questions all the time since we started the company. Do you want to replace lawyers? Do you want to replace judges? This sounds like a project from UCL Computer Science Law Department. Like, why you are doing this as a company? What is the commercial interest in all this? So I think that in order to best understand this question is to give you a general overview of how we developed as a company and how ideas that were driving us to develop new ideas, new products, essentially were formed. So at least for me, and I think that my colleagues will agree with me, it all started when we were studying law at Cambridge University. I remember sitting in a land law supervision, and then I was like dealing with some basic problem question. It's always like some Richard. This Richard was a legal owner of a house. Then however, he promised his very good friend James that James can stay there as long as he wants and enjoy the property, right? However, then what Richard does is that he takes a mortgage that he cannot pay for, and then the bank wants the house, and James is completely perplexed and he doesn't know what to do because he was promised that he could stay there, right? And so the supervisor told me, Joseph, solve this question. And I've been already studying law for land law especially for several weeks. Yet I was a little bit hesitating, looking all around me, trying to find a solution. And then, so he helped me, Joseph, that's very easy actually. You just establish that James has a proprietary right, but be aware of the scintilla temporis problem. Don't forget about the fact that he might have impliedly waived his priority. Then you just go to then you just consider whether James' interest has been overreached. Then you just go to Section 29 of the LRA 2002. That's the basic rule. Then you go to Section 20. Firstly, Section 28. Sorry, I'm still a little bit confused. Then Section 20, Section 29, and it's very easy. You just need to have a registrable disposition of a registered estate for valuable consideration. Section 132, and then you might as well go to Schedule 3. And here are 20 cases that define what does it mean actual occupation. And then I was, okay, so this might have actually helped me a little bit, but no wonder James doesn't know what to do. That's a very clear, it was a very clear understanding that law simply is very, very complicated. And it seemed to me, and I think to all of us when we started the company, that law is simply too complicated. How can a normal, ordinary person with his life and his job think about all these complicated sections and all these complicated legal problems when they are planning their lives, when they're living their lives as normal human beings, right? But what does it then mean? It means that people cannot use the law for their benefit, and they are probably going to be punished for that. And So essentially what we started, firstly, maybe we see the legal problem, people are not informed, law is too complicated. What we can do about that is that we can, start building chatbots. Now I should probably, here, good. The next slide, please. Good. But that's the important question, right? Now, so we have the problem. People are not informed. What we do with this? One of my friend Ludwig was very interested in AI. Let's try to build a computer program that will help easily, for no cost, inform any person about any legal problem. So we started building these programs. However, after some time, as it always happened during the whole time in the company, we realized that this is probably not the best way how to solve the law. The main reason was essentially that the state of the artificial intelligence is simply not as that developed that a computer program can understand language. Like Siri is the best thing that we have so far, and we can't simply talk to the computer about anything, right? So it wasn't we couldn't probably solve this kind of question with chatbot. And also commercially, it might mean that we might probably, make some processes more effective, like asking few questions, simple questions, simple process, right? Another thing was that people have this very strange thing that they like to prove themselves that they are better than the chatbot. So then we were getting responses like, hello, Mr. X, what's your legal problem? The bot asked, right? And the person responded, I was sexually harassed by an alien, right? And this just ruins the whole concept. That's what people were doing the whole time. That might be an interesting topic of a study for the next project. Now, right, so, however, later when really going further in our law studies, we realized that there might be a further problem in law. It's not only that people are not informed, it's that people are simply, that we might not even know what the law is. And the explanation is very simple. Again, look, most of the legal doctrines, or across all the areas of law, in English law, for example, and that's the same thing for almost any legal jurisdiction, we have those broad discretionary questions, right? So in order to get compensated, the person who, for example, damaged your property in some way, he firstly has to breach a duty of care. What does it mean, breach of duty of care? Would a reasonable person act in a similar way or in a different way, right? Now again, whether the terms in the contract are implied, an officious bystander test, this is even better. So you have a random person walking. You have to imagine as a judge, a random person walking, there are two people talking to each other, discussing the contract, right? And if this random person, seeing that they are discussing the contract, asks them, is this term, wouldn't you like this term, whatever it can be part of your contract? And if they say, of course, then the term is implied. Again, how, if those discretionary questions exist in the law, how is it possible that the law is applied in the same way, in the same circumstances? So the main question arose, if we have two same factual scenarios that go to two different judges, will we have the same outcome? In other words, is law objective? Is there an objective answer, a good, correct, objective answer to any legal problem? So that was something that we wanted to consider as well. Because if there is none, it means that two people are treated differently, and they shouldn't be. It means that the law is inconsistent. It means that a person, again, they don't know how to plan their lives. They can't adapt their lives to the rules that they have to follow, which is fundamentally wrong. And then, however, even further questions arose. And those questions are, for example, when studying criminology, you can clearly see that black and other minorities defendant, right? They get there is a 20% higher chance that they will end up in custody. They have longer custodial sentences. Certain allegedly types of discrimination happen also to women in our criminal system, criminal justice system, right? So what if judges are actually not only that we don't know what the law is actually, but that they don't even apply only law, right? There may be some subconscious biases that are driving their decisions. And if those subconscious biases exist, then there are other relevant questions. I don't know. What if the one of the parties in the litigation is some huge corporation, powerful corporation, or some very famous person. It surely can be different for the outcome of the case if the party to the litigation is Barclays as opposed to, I don't know, Devinská banka from Košice, right? This might be the possible result because it seems like the decisions are driven by subconscious factors. Now, how can we solve this thing, right? How can we solve this problem? We are not in the head of the decision makers. Now, we can maybe see some data. We can extrapolate sort of something from the data. We can assume what's happening. But then we actually came up with, I think, a solution. And that's why we are here right now. The solution is, imagine that you have a system that can read tens of thousands of cases in one day, a system that can remember all those cases, and a system that can, without any assistance, extrapolate from seeing that certain cases are won, certain cases are lost, the legal rules that are driving those decisions, right? Because even though we as humans, we always expect that those decisions are driven by these abstract legal rules that we are creating. Maybe this is not true and we have all the indications. But these kind of system, neural networks, artificial intelligence that we are applying right now can help us understand what is actually going on behind those decisions, right? It can help it can help us understand whether there is inconsistency. It can help us understand what kind of maybe subconscious factors are driving those decisions. Now, this is from the vision point of view, right? But also commercially, on top of that, if you think about it, if the system understands what are the factors driving the decisions, then it can also predict the outcomes. And that's where we got. And we really believe that right now we are in the spot where this is the right combination of a general, maybe social importance that we as a company can give to generally, and at the same time, it has a huge value, we think, commercially, right? Now, what about commercial value? What it can do? It can make decisions a lot more effective, right? You can, instead of having a huge department of lawyers, it can simply, you just insert the data, and it will give you their predictions about what do they think is the outcome. And then the decision maker, for example, a bank, can decide what they're going to do with the cases or no. But it doesn't have to be necessarily opposed to lawyers. It can also help them identify the core issues in the case, right? And it really takes a few seconds sometimes a day if there's more data involved, and one click, on the computer. So we really believe that there is a huge commercial value in the system. Now, what is the future for us as a company? Right now, we are getting our first clients if we prove the concept, right? We are trying to contact the first clients. We are trying to help those decision makers with any legal problems they have, especially if there is enough data. There we are scoping further use for the system we are going to present you. And also, in the near future, we are thinking about getting some funding. So that'll be all of me. I think that if we have enough resources and if we have enough perseverance, I think that we can really solve the questions that are bothering us for more than 2 years right now. Thank you.
So, as Joseph mentioned, we've been active in the legal tech sphere for over a year now. And during that time, we've evolved to nearly Darwinian proportions, both technologically and in terms of what we do. But one thing that has remained consistent from day one is that we feel that in the legal tech sphere, people are asking the wrong questions, and there are misconceptions about what AI can do and what it will do in the future. So, just to give you a brief example of this, as the marketing director, I get a lot of questions from journalists. Can you guess what the biggest question, the most frequent question I get asked is? No. That's a good answer, but no. Will robots replace lawyers? See, it's even less technologically savvy. I, at this point, refuse to answer that question. So if you ask me it, I will just leave. So that is the biggest misconception and the biggest wrong question we are being asked. Another misconception in the legal industry is exactly how AI will be changing the industry and what exactly it can do. We've noticed that while many large law firms are spending exorbitant amounts of money on artificial intelligence in their industries, oftentimes when asked what value it adds and what exactly it does, they can't give you a straight answer. So as many of you know, AI has become a bit of a buzzword. So to ask the question, how did we come up with the lawyer challenge? We came up with the idea in the same way that many of the 21st century's best ideas have been come up with, over a beer in a bar in Berlin. We were discussing what if. What if this could happen? What if a machine could compete against a man to harness and assess each capability and penetrate through the narrative that has been overarching in this industry to actually produce results? And then we realized we're talking. There is just too much talking going on. Why don't we start doing? And that is how the lawyer challenge started. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about the format of the lawyer challenge, something we've been planning for a good part of 2 months now. So all of the lawyers who've competed have been pre-registered. We got sign-ups over the past month, and these lawyers range from in-house counsel, magic circle firms, and barristers. So there's a very diverse range in very diverse practice areas. And yes, we did make certain to tell them that they cannot bill us for their time, so please don't try. The challenge ran from last Friday until midnight yesterday, so from the 20th to the 27th of October. Registrants were given login details to a GUI in which they were presented with factual scenarios. These scenarios focused on PPI mis-selling complaints. How we got this was through the Freedom of Information Act. We compiled thousands and thousands, around 20,000 cases from the Financial Ombudsman Service and stripped away any revealing characteristics, so the plaintiff's names, for instance. And we presented lawyers with these factual scenarios and said, is the client likely to have their claim upheld? They would answer yes or no, and then the exact same factual scenario would be given to CaseCrunch to answer similarly. It's simple. Whoever had the most accurate predictions won. And I will tell you why we chose PPI in a second. Now, we weren't trying to trip anyone up. We wanted this to be a fair and transparent competition. If lawyers so wished, they could Google information about PPI. They could look up resources. They could try and cheat if they wanted. They had it completely flexibly. I've heard from several people that they were doing the challenge on their morning commute. So, really. And how we verified the results was we had 2 independent judges, a lawyer judge and a tech judge, who I will be introducing you to in a second. So just to give you a bit of statistics, we had over 110 participants, lawyers, from over 20 law firms, and in the past week we had over 775 predictions. That is a lot of billable hours. And just to give you an example of the enthusiasm surrounding the challenge, we had several big-name law firms competing. Many of them had teams, though of course we cannot tell you for non-anonymity reasons who was the best. So why, you may ask, PPI? I actually got a call 5 minutes before giving this talk from someone trying to sell me PPI insurance, or recomplain. I'm sure many of you have the same thing. This isn't why we chose it. As you may know, PPI is a huge deal right now. Over £34 billion has been compensated in the past few years. And you're getting all these calls because of the upcoming 2019 deadline for insurance claims. As Joseph has mentioned, artificial intelligence, and particularly what we do in predictive analytics, has potentially limitless scope. We could have used any sort of case to judge the challenges. But the way it works best is in specific use cases. We thought PPI is intuitive, it's relatively simple to learn, and it's flexible. And we feel it perfectly exemplifies not only the use of our system, but the capabilities of lawyers. And just to tell you about our 2 wonderful judges. As mentioned, we had 2 independent judges to verify the transparency of the competition. Our tech judge was Ian Dodd, the UK Director of Premonition, which is also a legal analytics firm which has pioneered huge research, both internationally and in the UK. And for our lawyer judge, we had Felix Steffek, LLM, PhD, lecturer in law at Cambridge and my personal supervisor, so I can attest to his brilliance. We chose these people because of their fluency in their respective fields and just how respected they were. And we fully feel like they will independently verify the challenge. We did not bribe them. So just to give you a final note, we feel that it really doesn't matter who wins or who loses today. We've succeeded in doing what we wanted to do, which is to engage in the narrative and actually pit lawyers against machines. One journalist who is here today, when I said this was a man versus machine challenge, said, "But where do the lawyers fit in?" And just looking around the room, the fact that I see bankers, consultants, insurance brokers, shows me that this is important, not just to the legal industry, but potentially to everyone. And I thank you for coming. And I'd like to introduce Felix Steffek, our wonderful legal judge, to give a brief discussion.
Thank you. So good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I would like to start with saying it was a great pleasure working with you. When the three, Rebecca, Ludwig and Joseph asked me whether I was willing to be the legal judge of this competition, I did not have to think long about it. Because Rebecca had told me about her prior AI project that was concerned criminal law, and I had followed that. I found it fascinating at the time. So when she, when Joseph, when you wrote to me, I really did not have to think long, and it was the right decision for me. It was a very pleasant process working with you. The team asked me, now I'm taking out the piece of paper because now comes the legal bit. They asked me to comment on two things. Firstly, they asked me to check whether the factual descriptions of the problems from the Financial Ombudsman Service are a reasonable basis for a prediction on PPI mis-selling complaints being either upheld or rejected by the Financial Ombudsman, and this happening at an early stage of the advisory process. So the fact patterns or the fact sets represent fact sets at a relatively early stage of the advisory process. Think of the client calling you, telling you the basic information. Secondly, they asked me to comment on whether trained lawyers, using all the resources they have, being from law firms or sets of barristers, and using these resources they usually work with, and now you added cheating as well. I'm not sure whether that is a usual resource. Whether they are able to make reasonable predictions based on these fact sets about these problems, even though the information given per claim may vary, so the length of and the details of the summaries varies, and even though maybe at a later stage, at the time when the ombudsman would decide, more information might be available. I can say that I'm happy to confirm this. I can confirm both statements in the affirmative. I make this statement against the background of tormenting and torturing them on the way they chose the facts. I took a look at a number of randomly chosen fact sets, and to give you background, by way of standardization, the team took summaries of cases and then cut out the solution part, which left the introductory and the background facts part. This was a standardized procedure just to allow the large number of cases to be used, and I think that was a valid basis. So overall, I think the basis for the competition is valid. And then because you asked me to comment a little bit from maybe an academic perspective on the use of AI and in legal issues, I think probably to start with, many people in the room would share the idea with me that AI will play a revolutionizing role in the legal industry. The question is maybe what role it will exactly play. I think we are, or at least I am confident that AI will influence the way that public and private actors will order their relationships. And this concerns the point in time before something happens and after something happened. Today we are after something happened, the conflict arose. Now, if I would take a look at AI and legal issues, as an academic, I would start on a threefold, using a threefold taxonomy. I would distinguish descriptive and normative use of AI. I would also distinguish between ex ante and ex post use of AI, and I would distinguish whether intermediaries are involved or not. What do I mean with this taxonomy? With descriptive, I relate to whether AI is used to analyze or describe the law as it is, as opposed to normative use of AI, where AI would tell us something about what good law is or what the law should be. So that's my first, kind of my first background. Secondly, I would distinguish whether you use AI before a human transaction or an interaction happens, or whether you use it after it happened. So I would take the human transaction, the interaction, as the focus, and ask whether we use AI before or after that happened. For example, you could use AI to design a contract, and then on that contract, goods are delivered, or you use AI after it. So that's the exposed situation where the contract was concluded by normal ways, but then the conflict arises, and then you use AI to solve the conflict. Thirdly, and I was arriving with a twofold taxonomy. Joseph, you brought up another thing. The third point is probably, where do intermediaries fit into the relationship of AI? Now, if you look at tech progress, and then what we see is we're closely getting closer to what you could call the economist's heaven. Economist's heaven would be a place where people interact directly. They don't use intermediaries. So instead of calling your taxi firm, you go directly to your taxi driver. So, and the question is probably, do we use AI? Your example was, I would not need a lawyer, or one of your examples was, I would not need an intermediary to tell me what the law is. I would know directly using AI. Or is it that intermediaries offer certain AI services where the intermediary's role would change? Now, I'm sure you haven't come here to listen to a lecture, so I will stop here and hand over to Ludwig, and I think, Ludwig, you will tell us something about the system that entered into the competition. Thank you.
So now I get to tell you a little bit about the system that we entered into the competition, and more importantly, I get to talk about how it all works. So before I get started, facts and law are important, but also non-legal factors that traditionally people wouldn't associate as being important for the outcome. And then there's also this factor X. And sometimes it's quite difficult to pinpoint what exactly the model is finding, right? Because sometimes it's picking up on certain underlying statistical patterns that aren't necessarily intelligible to us. We can't always perfectly explain why a model is performing very well. But this is interesting because it shows that when we create this kind of intuitive legal reality, we're encoding certain patterns that we then can't immediately decode without an aid like this. And that's why I think AI is fundamentally interesting for law and for lawyers, is because it gives us a different tool to decode legal information. Instead of simply applying our analytical toolbox and saying, look, we can analyze this problem according to this concept and that concept, and here's how they traditionally interact, we can say, let's have a machine try to make mathematical and statistical sense of this. And it might find some things that are counterintuitive. It might find some things that are not intelligible to us, but it's simply a different kind of way to deconstruct that information. And what we're working on really now at the moment is that it's clear for us that the commercial use case, but also the performance of the system is really well established in these niche areas, right? Or in these precisely defined areas. So as long as you ask a specific question and you have enough data, you're going to get a good system. In this case, the question was, would the ombudsman uphold or reject the complaint? You can imagine this going to contract law. You can say, was there a breach of contract or not on these specific facts? If there's a ton of data, there's no reason why a system shouldn't perform very well. But what's interesting is that if we know we can do it for this niche, and we know we can do it for that niche, and this niche as well, can we not build one system that connects them all? Multitask learning, right? That we can extrapolate from these little areas and find overarching, broader principles that drive these decisions. That's where we're headed from this point on. Great. So I would just comment at this point that now we're moving on to the results reception, the results announcement. And if you're interested in this kind of work, we're going to publish a paper on this later tonight, and also it'll be available next week. So we're still working on it really to figure everything out perfectly, but we do think it's very important that we also contribute to the research in this area. And if you're interested in kind of the conceptual background, not just how the system works, but what the significance might be for legal theory, I very much encourage you to read that paper. Cool. So thank you very much. I will hand over to Ian Dodd, who will announce the results.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you're expecting Tess Daly or Claudine Winkleman, you're already desperately disappointed. It's just me. Premonition and CaseCrunch exist in the same sort of environment. We look at data analytics. And it's important to differentiate between what AI does in the process of contracts and paperwork and data analytics. They're two separate things completely. Now, Premonition was set up by two Englishmen who live in Florida, one of whom decided that he'd been in the divorce courts for quite a long time and he was a bit fed up with it. And also, as the Americans are litigious buggers, he was actually sued for having no lift in a one-story shopping mall he owned. You can understand that, can't you? But not as good as the woman who was given a large insurance payout for witnessing a car crash, and she sued one of the drivers for the loss of her psychic powers. That's Americans for you. Okay, Dan Quayle, who was an erstwhile Vice President of the United States, said amongst several other things that all predictions are dangerous, especially those about the future. Now, he didn't realise the irony of this when he said it, but Dan didn't have enough data, did he? If it had enough data, he'd have been able to work out the future, because you have enough data, you can run the stats, and you get a very high confidence levels, and you can say, this is going to happen. Now, I'm going to rush to the results now, because I know you're all excited about this. I didn't look at the results because I'm not a techie, so Ludwig sent them over to the States, and at 1 minute past midnight last night we got an email saying, this is what we've done. So the guys in the States looked at the results, and this is what they told me this morning, and I'm going to read this because I don't understand it. There were 23,291 cases, which the guys looked at, including all the lawyers. The machine correctly predicted 20,174. Which is, you've already worked this out, it's 86.6% correct. Now, previously, the guys at CaseCrunch have run this data, and they've got up to 92, 93%, but they've only had a week to do it. It's the number of iterations they tell me that it goes through that makes it perfect. Those of you with a statistical background will understand if you've got up to 95% confidence limits, that's as good as you're going to get. So, the machine did 86.6%. Da, 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 da. The lawyers did 775 predictions, as Ludwig just put up on the screen there. They answered 483 of these correctly. You've already worked it out, 62.3%. Don't ask me, ask the techies. You're not one of the disappointed lawyers, are you? So, that's rather startling, I imagine, for those of you who entered the competition or thought that lawyers were perfectly infallible in the things they did. The machine has beaten them. You're thinking about that, aren't you? Ludwig will explain more of this later, I'm sure. Interestingly, of course, when you're looking at AI and lawyers, you work out, you say to yourself, what would the cost of this have been? 62.3% correctness at, say, £300 an hour over XX hours, or £100 an hour or £1,000 an hour, is a lot of money to get 62.3% correct. The machine, which costs £17 an hour to run and does it in not very long, did 86.6%. Think about the consequences and implications of that when you think about AI. So, are we happy with these results? These guys are. Are the lawyers bereft, disappointed, suicidal? It's the 9th floor here. There's a balcony out there. Okay, I'm going to hand you back to Ludwig now. There you go.
have one question for you. Will robots take your jobs? No. Thank you to everyone who participated, and thank you for the lawyers for not charging us what Ian just said we should be charged. Fingers crossed, I deny all liability for paying that bill. Now, this has started out as an idea, but like any idea, it doesn't belong to any single person. This isn't the CaseCrunch Lawyer Challenge. This is the Lawyer Challenge. We welcome anyone to try and do it again. As Ian said, the Americans, go ahead, give your unique slant, litigate against as many people as you want. And like an idea, this couldn't have happened just with the three of us. So I want to thank you, first of all, to our sponsors. So Kennedy's for providing this amazing venue today, and of course the free wine and canapes, which you will be receiving very soon. So thank you to Kennedy's. I also want to thank Pinsent Masons, who have so kindly agreed to sponsor us with the camera crew and, of course, all these microphone problems we're having. So thank you to them. And thank you. I'm kidding.
Good microphones, I'll have you know.
They're the best microphones and the most innovative microphones you can get. Thank you to cosmonauts who have tirelessly taught me how to run an event and for making this such a resounding success. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And I want to say thank you to our judges. So thank you, Felix, and thank you, Ian, for taking the time to judge it, to be here, to do everything today. And finally, thank you to all the participants who aren't charging us. Thank you to everyone who took the time to take these predictions, to make the predictions, and to make what it is today, and I suppose for the losing. So thank you to everything involved. All right. So now we're going to be presenting ourselves for some questions, and then we will be feeding you. So thank you for coming, and ask us anything you like.
Yes.
Can I ask, what's your ultimate objective? Where do you want to take it from here, and where do you see it developing over the next year or two?
Right, so ultimate objective. Do you know Hercules from Dworkin? So Dworkin, who's a legal philosopher, has this notion of a judge called Hercules who can make perfect predictions about any single case. So that's the ultimate goal, I guess, right?
Hercules had many labors, of course.
He did.
To get to where he wanted to. So it took him much longer than you anticipated. How long do you anticipate your horizon will be before you get to where you want to?
Right. Well, I mean, that just kind of is a conceptual point where we want to get it at some point in the future. But for the immediate goal, of course, we now want to. We think we've shown the use case, so we want to build these systems for a number of our clients. And while we do that, we then also want to learn how to, as I mentioned, do this multitask learning and how to extrapolate more to build end-to-end systems, not only for these niches, but that can kind of extrapolate to multiple niches at the same time. Because I think that's the path that we have to take in order to get to a useful system that has a more general application. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Do you really think it was a fair competition to put a computer which had had the 20,000 cases and gone through various iterations of it so it would improve its answers against a group of lawyers who had never done PPI before, with no reference to those 20,000 cases? And you said they could use their law researchers. I did try that when I was a participant, but couldn't find anything really very useful. At least a pointer to where to find the cases might have helped. But you're comparing, let's say, like in the sort of famous Kasparov in it's like putting a computer which knows all the rules of chess against someone who's learning as they're going along.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question for the whole room, the question was whether or not this is a fair competition because, a lot of these lawyers didn't have necessarily the right background for PPI and because they hadn't seen that many cases of this before. Or none. And because maybe they weren't given the resources. So I think there's a number of answers to that question. So first of all, we did point them towards the Financial Conduct Authority, which, if they wanted to learn something about PPI, they could have gone there and seen these sample cases, for example. The second point is we really struggled to find an area to begin with anyways, because lawyers specialize in so many niche areas that we had to find something that was relatively easily intelligible to most lawyers, and that could also, you could understand the underlying legal principles relatively quickly. So while I think it's a fair point to say, of course, right, Not every single lawyer who participated in this challenge necessarily had all of the background. We thought that this is probably as best as we can get it right now. This is as fair as we could make it for this point. And I think the fact that like the advantages that the machine had are not necessarily, it's not wrong that the machine had these advantages. These are just kind of inherent advantages that a machine will always have against lawyers in these specific predictions.
Yes, but in the real world, it would be computing against someone who knows about behaviour and would have the equivalent to its training by going through the same cases until it got a decent result.
Yeah.
But they would build that up over years of experience.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Why don't you use a machine to do it?
I don't understand the point.
Well, the point you're making is that lawyers couldn't get there as fast as the machine did. Why don't you have a machine to do exactly what you just asked the question about, which is what these guys have done?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I think what you mean, I found that as well. I'm not a PPI lawyer. I think what would be interesting if you could split the results out to show the percentage that were correct from lawyers with a PPI background and then as against just a lawyer generally. Quite
Yeah,
interesting.
But actually, I think the interesting result is the percentage the machine got right, despite all the training. It was still 18% short.
Yeah, well, 86.6, but sure.
Well, it's whatever.
Yeah, so I think, sure, there's a lot more investigation we can do, and specifically about how maybe we set up the competition, and there are certainly some things we've learned, right? And if we wanted to do another competition like this in the future, we might approach some things differently. But I think, as Ian was mentioning, it's quite striking that something that might take one particular lawyer to build up expertise over for a very long time, a machine can do very quickly because it has this bird's eye perspective. Yeah, if that answers the question. But
Yeah.
great. Yes, please.
I guess a two-parter. It's a great achievement, well done. The time you had, it's fantastic. I'm sure you're familiar with the work that was happening in America about 10 years ago where they did the same exercise against SCOTUS type appeals. And what was quite interesting was they were using machine learning in order to extrapolate the features and present that as a decision tree. I guess the first part of my question is, do you have an explicit understanding of those features that were extrapolated as part of the process that you could, for example, going back to your point, communicate back to legal professionals? I guess that's one part of the question. Second part is, do you think when you look at those features, some of them could be to do with the way in which the facts are presented after the decision is made? And so there's something inherent in the way that the facts have been described so as to give the answer away. Much like a bad joke, you know the punchline is coming. And so I think there's a bit of that might be going on as well. So how do you objectively, can you possibly objectively describe facts in such a way before, when you're using cases? So I would be quite interested to know if there had been another process to extract the facts and use that as your input without the actual text, still using the models you're using. So yeah, two parts.
So just to really quickly maybe repeat the question. The first question was, were we able to extract all of the features
Or some
of the features,
yeah.
and can we maybe feed those into the decision tree? That would maybe then again form lawyers' approach to this. And the second part of the question was how maybe there's a certain way to describe facts that drive the outcome and whether or not that's
because these facts were in the actual case report, if I
Yeah.
understood that correctly, which obviously, well, as that case report is being drafted, the decision is known, and therefore there may be a way in which the sequence of words have been put together, which
Make a
would
difference.
suggest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a super interesting question, right? Because this is exactly what I think is useful about AI and law working together, because you can then derive insights about the law by applying these tools. Now, as regards to the specific challenge, because it was really quite a limited area, there's not that much that we were able to identify just up until now, which again, read the paper, there might be some more information there. Clearly, facts matter, which is obvious, the law, and then also a little bit the appellate history. So again, these are things that you can then give to a lawyer and say, here are some maybe non-legal factors that also have a very important impact on the outcome. Now, as regards the point you made about facts and maybe a certain way to describe facts, so I'm not really aware that that actually has that much of an impact. And the reason for this is also that there's only even though people can describe facts differently, right? And even though people might have a different subjective understanding of facts, there's only so many ways you can describe being missold PPI in a branch of a bank, for example, right? And if you have a huge data set, that just kind of averages out over time. So it might be an interesting area to look into, maybe not necessarily for this experiment, but I would doubt whether or not there's a specific way how you can describe the facts that will then impact the outcome massively.
If I may add something. So I think it's a very good and valid question, of course. the examples that I read, I can say I didn't find any kind of intuitive or kind of between the lines indication. So I rather felt that because the ombudsman and ombudswomen want to present themselves as being objective, I think my feeling was that part of the summary was pretty objective in a way, because it kind of brings legitimacy to the decision. However, then asking the question whether the competition was fair, then probably both participants had a chance, if there was something, to get it, right? So the lawyers would have had the intuition to see, I already feel where this is going, whereas the machine probably would have found patterns that we don't even see. But I in terms of the fairness, I would say that both should have had a chance to find it.
I'm sorry to give a follow-up on that. I wasn't questioning the validity or the fairness.
No.
All I'm saying is that I think this is one of the powerful features of AI in order to derive that learning. And I think, going back to your point, there are only so many ways to describe the facts. Maybe there is indeed a correlation between the way you would, one of those ways, and indeed the outcome that would not be available to any human, no matter if they're Hercules or otherwise. But no, I'm not questioning that.
I didn't understand it that way. I just want to kind of, I think it was still a very valid question in terms of the comparison.
Yeah, right on this topic, about how are the facts created? Does the ombudsman create the facts? Because, I'm from Germany, we are also a legal tech startup, and one of our colleagues, one of our team members also ran maybe a similar project with a couple thousand German Supreme Court decisions. And what we determined in the end was just that the facts were biased, that there's a certain pattern within the facts. So the computer can say, okay, this decision goes into this direction and to the other direction. How are the facts created?
They're written by the ombudsman. So there is a human ombudsman who writes these in a relatively objective way.
After the decision or before the decision?
Before the decision. Right, so they're going into, there's different stages, right? There's different things that are published. Sometimes they will describe the facts and then later on issue a decision. In some cases, however, the background is also part of the whole decision that is reported, right? So it might be like background, so introduction, background, and then my findings, and then answer, right? So there might be some correlation there, of course, yeah. And that's something that we can, of course, explore. Yeah.
I know that you're at the, I was going to say the proof of concept, but maybe proven concept stage as of this evening. Could you tell us a little bit more about what the product would look like, how you anticipate the rollout? So I'm anticipating not some kind of mechanical Turk left at some law firm offices. What does the service look like, or what does the product look like in 6 months' time?
Do you want to take that, Joseph?
Yeah, so essentially, again, how exactly the GUI or the interface is going to look like depends on the client. Again, the main way how we want to use this predictive analytics system is to help corporations with any legal problems, especially there are many of them and they need to hire, for example, many lawyers to deal with them, to streamline those cases and to deal with those cases more effectively. So what would be the product? Essentially a legal problem within the company where people are, where the company cannot deal with it, right? And then we just try to implement the system and help them streamline the whole process. Exactly how the product looks is very hard to say, because it's the interface will be obviously adapted to the specific problem in question.
But I think a good term here is kind of legal bottlenecks, right? So again, we're not making these huge claims and now we've solved law or anything. We're saying if you ask specific questions and there's good data and you take a look at it, then you can build relatively good systems that will produce high accuracy figures. So within organizations, these kind of problems exist, clearly, right? Banks, large corporations, law firms, whatever. There's tons of data lying around. There's a bottleneck. They spend a lot of money and time on solving this. And it seems useful to have a system that can solve that.
And I think the first step in that is definitely figuring out what the bottleneck is. So, many law firms have approached us saying, we'd love to use your systems, but we can't really identify a problem. So that's definitely something we want to help identify. If it isn't broke, don't fix it, but it is broke. But what is broke, essentially?
Yeah, and I think if I can just really quickly touch on that, because we had an early event at the Google Campus London, and one kind of interesting question that emerged there was how exactly do you create that interface between lawyers and people who have a little bit of a tech background, and how do those two worlds kind of interact? Because some people from law firms told us, yeah, and I always go ask my lawyers, like, hey, can't we use some AI in your work, and how does this work? And they're like, no, there's no problems. Everything's working beautifully, right? So clearly, that interface between professionals who have real insights about the problems that they're trying to solve and people who understand what kind of areas currently the technology can be adapted to, that I think getting that interface right is super valuable for everyone. Great. Maybe one more question? Yeah.
I was just thinking about your ambition to be Hercules type of predictor. Does that require like a static law, or would it be able to do plan on it being able to work in the world where law evolves and changes?
I think that's a very good question. So the question just was whether or not, this requires static, settled law, or whether maybe if there's some uncertainty or there's a sudden new case that comes up that changes the law, how will that kind of impact the system, right? And very clearly, because it runs off aggregate data, if there's just like one new case that comes out that changes everything, then it's not going to be able to pick up on that unless you somehow tell it to, right? So that again already limits the application in certain ways. It doesn't, there's still plenty of application for it. But since it runs off aggregate data and finding these huge patterns across large data sets, if there's an area of great uncertainty, it probably won't perform very well. And we were trying this out over the summer also with much general levels where we were getting like basically 50% accuracy, right? Just because it's impossible to for the system to distinguish then. So we've really we started really big by saying we want to do all of this, and then we've kind of narrowed it down more and more to say, here's a niche, here it works, let's go to the next niche, and then maybe we can go back up at some point. Cool. Great. Yes, of course.
On your system, knowing the answer yes or no is very helpful, but also knowing how it got there. And it's really what a lawyer, if they're using an AI system on the desk, would want to know. So they know what part of the case, what system to sort of bolster. But if the machine is making decisions based on something, it's worked out from the pattern from the data, how do you see that working for lawyers to be able to use it as a tool to improve a case?
Yeah. So I would have one qualification to that. So surely the machine is picking up on certain patterns that maybe we wouldn't find intelligible, but a lot of it we would find intelligible, right? Like there are very clear things that we can see whether that's picking up on, which humans pick up on as well, because otherwise there would be no distinction between the data in the first place, right? But how does this problem that machines, or at least this system, doesn't give reasons necessarily for its decision, that's not an unsolvable problem at all, right? Like you can build different networks that are kind of encoding and then decoding things. So you could imagine that you could build a system, you put in all these PPI stuff, then you would need to have some data that explains why it reaches that decision. So you can build these kind of systems as well, where the system gives reasons, right? That's a little bit less explored and less technologically advanced at this point. So when we speak, for example, with some of our legal clients, we always ask them in this tick boxing exercise, is it important that the system explains how it reaches the result? And if they say yes, it is, then we say, okay, this might not be the best application. So to answer the question, it's not an unsolvable problem, it's just right now not as well established as simply making the prediction. Does that answer the question?
Okay. Yeah. So I just have a point of clarification. So does a person like you, for example, building this system, can he understand what are the factors?
Yeah, I mean, of course, right? So I can see what it's picking up on, right? Like I can see that there are certain legal factors it's picking up on. I can also just run tests by throwing in random bits of data and seeing how it performs. I can see there's non-legal factors. Some things, I can't explain it exhaustively, right? But of course, as a human, you're building the system, you have a pretty good grasp of what's driving that.
So it is only hard to essentially get this information to a final consumer who doesn't know how to use who wasn't building the system and doesn't have that extensive knowledge, right?
Yeah, and it would be a little bit more difficult to ask the system to give the reasons itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's one of the kind of unknowns when it comes to AI. And the more it learns, the less we understand how it actually reaches those decisions. So a lot of people claim that you come to a point where it's going to be very hard for us to even understand or interpret the way that it has reached those decisions.
So I think that this notion, so the point that was made was that the smarter the AI gets, the more difficult it is for us to understand what it's doing, and that's obviously a problem. So I think this notion of a black box, that can definitely become a problem, because these systems might end up making very important decisions. We need to understand how they're making those decisions. But in the end of the day, what we're feeding into the system is data from the real world, where humans create data, right? And there are certain ways that we distinguish between different, winning and losing cases, for example. That's why lawyers can make predictions as well, right? There's ways that we understand this. And so at some point, that's all the machine can learn. So for example, if you want to take an example from computer vision, where you want to teach a computer how to distinguish between cats and dogs, well, it does exactly what the human eye does. It just distinguishes between different forms, different shapes, and it can somehow then understand that these things that have these certain contours look more like cats than these things like dogs, and therefore it's very intuitive, which is reassuring, I think. Cool. Okay, great. And in that case, thanks so much for your attention. Thanks again for coming. And I also just want to say a real thanks to the legal community for being very enthusiastic about this. We've been very, very grateful that we've had such a turnout and also so much participation, because at the end of the day, we can want to do a cool competition or whatever, but if nobody turns up and nobody makes predictions, that's not going to work. So thanks again for coming. Please join us for some canapes and some wine, and enjoy your night. Thank you.